Some of the most memorable films of all time can place themselves into the pantheon of Disney animation. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs made history as the first ever animated full-length film, and since then Disney has continued to break records in every sense in regards to the medium. Although many of these films portrayed characters who have been criticized for their perceived lack of independence and development, Disney has since gone on to create far more interesting, richly developed, and even morally questionable characters to round out their shelf of protagonists. But one thing had stayed the same for the vast majority of Disney's existence, and that's the method through which their animation was created. The beloved 2D, an animation technique wherein every frame is drawn one at a time to create the illusion of a moving picture. 2D was the very fabric of animation and its original medium, and that remained the case until 1995 when the alarm bells of what was to come began to ring. With the introduction of 3D animation, Disney now had a new and fresh style with which to present its films, but they still continued to create 2D animated films for around 14 years after the introduction of this new approach. But that all came to an end on December 11th, 2009, when Disney released its very last 2D animated film to date, The Princess and the Frog. In this video, we're going to examine why 2D animation died off as a means of filmmaking for Disney, and have a marvelous funeral for this gorgeous medium with regards to Disney's filmography. But as with any funeral, we will not only mourn the death, we will also celebrate the life lived. Because as sad as it might be that Disney no longer makes 2D animated films, at the very least, they went out with a bang and gave us 2D at its best. Now, in order for me to explain the themes and symbolism that make this film so great, I'm going to have to go through a summary of the plot. That means if you don't want spoilers, this is probably not the video for you. The Princess and the Frog. I love this movie. I will try my very best to put into words the amount of love that I have for this movie, but it will be difficult. The English language has too few words for me to describe to you the amount of pure, unadulterated joy that this film brings me. The Princess and the Frog is the 49th Disney animated film and was directed by John Musker and Ron Clements, who you probably know as the directors of The Little Mermaid, Hercules, and Aladdin. With such incredible works behind them, it's no wonder that this film was such a success, but for my money, The Princess and the Frog is a better film than any of their previous work. The film is based on the book by E.D. Baker, which is itself based on a Grimm fairy tale of the same name. Although if they followed the storyline from those novels, the movie would have ended about 25 minutes in. We'll begin our assessment of this film by examining its major characters. First, we have our main protagonist, Tiana, voiced by Anika Noni Rose. I could make a full video solely on how much I love this character. Tiana is not only my favorite of the Disney princesses, but is indeed my favorite Disney protagonist ever. Never before have I seen such a dynamic and fleshed-out protagonist from a Disney film. Tiana is an impoverished waitress living in New Orleans in 1926, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, was probably amazing. Over the years, she has saved every penny she can with the goal of opening a restaurant called Tiana's Place that she and her deceased father had dreamt of creating since she was a little girl. Already, there's such a wealth of the best kind of subversion with this character. First of all, Tiana is the only Disney princess who isn't born into royalty, nobility, or tremendous wealth outside of Belle and Mulan. But I certainly believe that Tiana captures the essence of the common person far better than the latter. She's extraordinarily relatable to a huge portion of the population just based on her profession alone. One of the major problems I see with Disney films is that they tend to have characters who are either bathed in riches, or in some cases are literally gods. Whereas this certainly works in the sense that children like to imagine life as a prince or a princess, I think it's really refreshing to have a more down-to-earth character who shows kids that they don't have to be wealthy to be valued. I also love the fact that this film portrays a huge subversion of the usual trope of Disney princesses having a tumultuous relationship with their parents. Most of the time, Disney characters have a rocky relationship with their parents and tend to rebel against their admittedly controlling and authoritarian wishes, but with Tiana it's very different. Tiana loved her father very dearly, and it's remarkably heartwarming and genuine to see that her love for her dad was so great that she spent her entire life trying to achieve the dream they had of opening a restaurant together. She still keeps this brochure of the restaurant style she wants to build as a memento for her dad, and it's very moving. My favorite thing about Tiana, however, is the fact that she strikes the perfect balance between being stoic and kind. She doesn't let people push her around when she has any power to stand up for herself, but she's also extremely empathetic and kind to those who treat her with dignity and respect. I think that most Disney princesses are geared to one side or the other, either being extremely defensive or way too passive. Now, both can certainly work, and I'm not saying one is inherently better than the other, but for my personal taste, Tiana is the best of both worlds. Tiana's strength as a character comes from her admirable work ethic, her unshakable determination, and her heart of gold that feels more alive than any other Disney character I can think of. It's very easy for me to imagine Tiana as a real person living next door because she really feels like a real person, and that can't be said for a lot of other characters Disney's made. One of the more famous examples of this is the fact that Snow White only has 7 lines in the entire film she appears in. On the topic of subversion, we have our second main protagonist, Prince Naveen. Naveen is the prince of a fictional country called Moldonia who travels to New Orleans with his servant Lawrence. Naveen is portrayed as the flip side of the traditional Disney prince, but not in the same way that Hans is. Naveen is portrayed as a sort of parody of the typical prince. Instead of being a charming, romantic, humble gentleman, Naveen is portrayed as a sleazy, arrogant womanizer. He's also starkly different from your typical Disney prince in that he isn't rich. Despite the fact that Naveen was raised in a palace and pampered his whole life, his arrogant disposition, rampant spending, and general incompetence led his parents to disown him and cut him from their will and the throne. Something I find especially fascinating about this dynamic is the fact that, as Naveen himself says later on, despite his high status in society, he's actually worse off in the long run than Tiana. Tiana has worked hard her whole life and knows how to survive in a harsh world, but Naveen, for all his self-importance, doesn't even know how to cut vegetables.
All right. But when you live in a castle, everything is done for you. All the time. They dress you, they feed you, drive you, brush your teeth.
Oh, poor baby.
I admit it was a charmed life until the day my parents cut me off, and suddenly I realized I don't know how to do anything.
Now, to the credit of the writing of this film, Naveen doesn't stay stagnant as a character, and the entire film story is basically about him realizing that he needs to be more humble and kind to the people around him, but nonetheless it raises a lot of great questions about preconceptions in the social pyramid.
Yeah. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready?
Where do I even begin with our next character? Well, I guess I'll start with his position in the narrative. Dr. Facilier is a witch doctor and tarot card reader who serves as the film's main antagonist. He's also the best Disney villain ever. Claude Frollo may be the most viscerally real Disney villain, but for my money, Facilier is the only candidate for best. First of all, and this should be all that needs to be said, he's voiced by Keith David.
Now we're cooking.
Keith David has such an extraordinary esteem in my mind. I mean, after all, even aside from the work he's done in live action, he's had a fantastic career step in animation just within the last few decades. He's played such roles as the Flame King in Adventure Time, the President in Rick and Morty, King Andreas and Amphibia, just to name a few, and of course, he'll always be the one true voice of Spawn.
Who made you God, little man? Not that gun, not that uniform, nothing.
But my love of the man who voices Facilier is only one small part of the reason he has such unmatched esteem in my mind. Facilier stands apart from almost every other Disney villain because he strikes a solid gold balance between being comedic enough to make him a hilariously funny character, but also comes across as a genuine threat in the way that few Disney villains do. Facilier is actually a lot more sinister than most Disney villains, and one of the few who actually kills a protagonist on screen. This means, of course, that every time he appears in the film, he immediately captures your attention. And speaking of catching attention, my god, this character has easily the most amazingly creative use of magic I've ever seen in my life. Rather than the more typical lightning bolts and flames that your usual Disney sorcerer will cast, Facilier's power comes from the Loa. I think that's how you pronounce this word.
Loa.
Dark spirits who are represented as shadows that can manipulate things in the material world. He calls them his friends on the other side. This is such a lovingly crafted and unique way to present sorcery, and I think it's one of the main reasons this character is so well remembered. The representation of Loa in the physical world as these wooden masks is also so creative and memorable. I think one of the reasons I love this character is the simple fact that we don't get characters like him anymore. When's the last time we got a classic Disney villain? I guess really Mother Gothel is the last one I can really think of, because now they've taken up the tact of either having no villain at all or using the tired trope of the twist villain, which was novel but has definitely outstayed its welcome at this point. I'll get a lot more into the myriad of reasons I love Facilier as we examine the story more closely, but good lord, this character is absolutely perfect. Within the purview of Disney villains, we have our second antagonist, Lawrence. Lawrence is Naveen's valet, which is basically a fancy way of saying servant. He carries Naveen's luggage and basically just does whatever he says. Lawrence is an interesting character in that he's the sidekick who gets fed up with being pushed around and decides to betray Naveen to his own ends, teaming up with Facilier to marry into the town's wealthiest family disguised as a handsome prince. Lawrence is a fascinating trope in that both he and Facilier share the same goal of having what they've always been denied: money. He's been abused throughout his life by the people around him and was clearly not valued by the royal family since he was banished right alongside Naveen. But instead of turning over a new leaf, Lawrence's get-even approach makes him a very clear antagonist. The only other thing that must be said of Lawrence is that his on-ice counterpart looks like it eats the fears of children. Then we've got Louie, the jazz-playing alligator.
I was confused by the topography and the geography and the choreography.
Voiced by the same person who plays this guy.
You will beg for the sweet release of death.
Louie wants to play jazz music, but the fact that he's a gigantic carnivorous reptile seems to be a strange barrier to him achieving this goal. I'm a huge fan of Michael Leon Woolley, who voices Louie, and so I'm probably biased here, but I do think he works really well as the more generic comic relief character, and he doesn't ever really get stale. Most of Louie's humor tends to rely on lowbrow jokes, but for whatever reason, it works well enough for me. Louie's main purpose in the story is to be the guide for our main characters through the swamps of Louisiana, but he's rather inept at this job, paving the way for our next character.
Well, look at here. Ooh, girl, I guess you and your boyfriend got a little carried away, am I right?
Ray is a lightning bug who lives in the swamps, and is voiced by the same person who plays this guy.
My crew was as carefully chosen as the disciples of Christ, and I will not tolerate stowaways. You will be flogged, and when we put into Cuba to resupply, God willing, you will be flogged some more, and then enslaved on the sugar plantations for the rest of your miserable lives. To the brick.
Ray introduces the most important aspect of this entire film in his love for the evening star, which he calls Evangeline. Towards the end of this video, I'll explain just why it is that this particular element is so important, but we'll get there in time. Ray helps to escort our main characters through the swamps on their journey after Louie leads them in the wrong direction. He's a wonderfully designed character, as you know everything you need to know about him just by looking at him. Jim Cummings actually counts Ray as his favorite role of all time, and funny enough, hoped that Disney would make a show about Tiana so he could play him again. Oh, sweet irony. Finally, we've got Lottie LaBeouf, the daughter of an extremely rich and powerful sugar baron named Eli. It's implied that Tiana's mother worked as a housekeeper or nanny for Lottie, which allowed for Tiana to become friends with her. She's the sort of placeholder for the Disney princess in this story. Her father is heavily evocative of the classical portrayal of a king, and for all intents and purposes, she lives in a castle. Lottie is portrayed as extremely selfish and spoiled, as despite being showered with great luxury and wealth, she is still rather ungrateful and callous.
My prince is never coming.
Now, Lottie.
I'll never get anything I wish for. Lottie, wait.
Although she is shown to have something of a heart, I still don't really like this character. It's hard not to look at the intense struggles of Tiana, be it the squalorous poverty she lives in or the fact that she faces overwhelming oppression and cruelty from her time, and then not hate this spoiled brat who thinks that not marrying a prince is some great slight against her. As I implied, Lottie wants to marry Naveen and have her fairy tale ideals come to fruition. Now, with that out of the way, let us begin our observation of the plot. Right off the bat, we open on this gorgeous shot of the exterior of Lottie's mansion. The color palette here is absolutely breathtaking and reminds me exactly why it is that 2D holds such a place of esteem in people's hearts. This one shot feels so alive, like you could almost feel the Louisiana humidity through the screen. We get a scene where a young Tiana and Lottie are being told a story by Tiana's mother that just so happens to be about a girl who kisses a frog and turns him into a prince. How fortuitous! Lottie asks for a new dress from her father, who tells her he won't be a pushover anymore, seconds before giving her a puppy. In one of the greatest moments of subtlety in this entire film, we get a transitional shot where Tiana returns home. The luxurious mansions of Lottie's neighborhood slowly become the slums of Tiana's part of town. This is just one of the many examples of how this film is an absolute masterclass in saying something without saying anything. We get an incredibly heartwarming scene where Tiana and her father cook a pot of gumbo together, and it's revealed that Tiana's father wishes to open a restaurant. He hands Tiana a pamphlet of the restaurant he wants to open, and they agree to call it Tiana's Place. Tiana wishes on the Evening Star to be able to open the restaurant, and we move forward several years into the future. It's revealed that Tiana's father is dead, having been killed in action after being drafted into World War I. She works 2 stressful jobs as a waitress and maid, and lives in a dingy one-room apartment, barely able to make ends meet. Despite saving as much as she possibly can in hopes of fulfilling her dream, Tiana has only managed to save a pretty meager sum of money. Across town, Prince Naveen arrives via ship with his servant Lawrence, and immediately takes to screwing around and wasting what little resources he has. It's revealed that Naveen intends to marry Lottie so he can leech off of her by lying and telling her that he's still a prince. Back at Tiana's place of work, it's revealed by Eli that he's holding a party in honor of Naveen's arrival, and that Lottie intends to propose to him. He pays Tiana a large sum of money and instructs her to cater the event. Now with enough cash to buy her restaurant, Tiana purchases an abandoned mill with the intention of turning it into Tiana's Place. Meanwhile, Naveen meets with Dr. Facilier, who gives us one of the best Disney villain songs of all time.
That's an echo, gentlemen. Just a little something we have here in Louisiana. A little parlor trick, don't worry.
I mean, seriously, in case you thought that there was a height that Keith David could not surmount, he's also an amazing singer.
Transformation Central. Transformation Central. Reformation Central. Transmogrification Central.
Fun fact about this song, by the way, Keith David actually choreographed a lot of it himself. He was actively doing dance moves in the booth that were transferred into the animation, which to me lends an extra air of endearment to this character. But this song once again showcases why this film is a masterclass in subtlety. For example, Dr. Facilier, who, big surprise here, turns Naveen into a frog, says this.
You just want to be free, hop from place to place. But freedom takes green. It's the green, it's the green, it's the green you need. And when I looked into your future, it's the green that I seen.
The animation in this one scene is so beautiful and so expertly crafted that a half-hour video could be easily made just on why this is such an amazing sequence. Facilier promises Lawrence the following deal. He will turn Naveen into a frog and dispose of him. Then, using Naveen's blood, he will create a necklace that allows Lawrence to look like Naveen and marry Lottie, allowing them both to get rich. While catering the party at Eli's mansion, Tiana learns from the people who sold her the property that they've decided to sell it to a higher bidder. Lottie becomes furious when Naveen doesn't show up, and throws a temper tantrum over not being able to marry the prince. She wishes on the Evening Star, and right as she does, Lawrence, impersonating Naveen, arrives and dances with Lottie. Tiana goes upstairs to clean herself off after falling into the banquet table and looks up at the star, distraught over her extremely unfortunate situation. Just then, Naveen, now transformed into a frog, appears to Tiana and asks her to kiss him to transform him back into a human, mistakenly believing her to be a princess. He convinces Tiana by promising her that he'll pay for the restaurant if she helps him. She does so, but the plan backfires as Tiana is also transformed into a frog. I love this scene. This is just one of the ways that this film so brilliantly subverts the audience in such a great way. If you didn't look up any of the promotional art before watching the film, you'd have been extremely confused here. I mean, everybody knows that in the original story, they kiss and that's the end. So it's a great way to make the audience really have to keep guessing as to what's going to happen next. Tiana and Naveen are chased off by a dog and flee on a balloon into the swamps. It's then revealed to Tiana that Naveen is broke and he lied to her.
Well, no wonder the kiss did not work. You lied to me.
I never said I was a princess.
You never said that you were a waitress. You were wearing a crown.
It was a costume party. You spoiled little rich boy.
Oh, yes? Oh, yes? Well, the egg is on your face, all right? Because I do not have any riches.
What?
I am completely broke.
I actually like this as it prevents the overused trope of having the characters get mad at each other and storm off in the last 2/3 of the movie, because that's become so prevalent in animation. Back at the mansion, Lawrence realizes that Naveen has escaped and is chastised by Facilier. Here we get what is my personal favorite scene in the entire film. Facilier explains that once Lawrence marries Lottie, he plans to kill her father so that Lawrence will inherit his wealth. But this 1 2-second long interaction says so much with so little screen time.
It's true.
Aren't you tired of living on the margins? While all those fat cats in their fancy cars don't give you so much as a sideways glance.
Right there you understand that Facilier has been poor for a long time, probably his whole life, and then his motives become a lot more fleshed out with him really not needing to say anything at all. Also, there is no greater irony on this earth than the fact that the last 2D animated film that Disney ever made contains this line.
Besides, you and I both know the real power in this world ain't magic. It's money. Buckets of it.
But there's one last thing I want to mention here, and that's this.
Fun fact about Voodoo Larry. Can't conjure a thing for myself.
What an interesting, unique concept for a villain. I love this idea that Facilier can't actually use the power of the Loa for himself, and so he has to be creative in order to get what he wants from others. This 2-minute long scene establishes so much in so little time and is just a perfect showcase of the incredible masterpiece that is this film. Meanwhile, Naveen and Tiana find Louis, who informs them that the voodoo queen Odie can reverse their curse and promises to lead them there. After getting into an argument that results in the two of them getting tied together by their tongues, they meet Ray, who frees them from Louis' brilliant idea to cut their tongues off. Lawrence begins to transform back into his real schlubby self due to the blood in the necklace running out, and so Facilier is forced to ask his friends on the other side to help him. In exchange, he promises to feed them the souls of everyone in New Orleans. Ray explains that he's in love with the evening star, whom he's named Evangeline. Ray believes that the star is a gigantic firefly and that he can court her. Like I said earlier, this will be important later on when I get to the proper dissection of the film's metaphors, but for now just keep this in mind. The group is rescued from the Loa by Odie, who takes them to her very strange home and tells them they can break the curse if Naveen kisses Lottie by midnight. Since Eli is going to be the king of the Mardi Gras, this will make Lottie a princess. Once again, this is brilliant. I don't know what else to say here, but it's brilliant. I also love that this cheeky bitch does this.
We don't want to take up too much of your time.
Y'all want some candy?
Not really.
No, thank you.
Well, now that's too bad. It's a special candy. Would have turned y'all human.
Well, you can take it.
I'm just messing with y'all.
They ride a riverboat back to the city, and in a genuinely sweet moment, Naveen redeems his previously obnoxious behavior by providing a dinner for Tiana. He decides that he loves Tiana more than he does luxury, and as such decides to be with her instead of Lottie. Before he can say as much, however, he's kidnapped by one of the Loa and taken to Facilier, who uses his blood to recreate the necklace. Tiana sees Lawrence marrying Lottie, and mistakenly believes that Naveen has forgotten about her. Ray tries to convince her of the truth, but then this happens. Man, I know a lot of other Disney films have character deaths, but usually not this late in. I mean, this catches you so off guard that I seriously doubt anyone could have predicted this would happen. In modern-day Disney movies, the character deaths are so heavily telegraphed that it's nearly impossible not to see them coming a mile away, or they also will have them be in the first 10, 15, or 20 minutes of the film. But this one really has a lot of impact because it happens so suddenly. Tiana manages to get the talisman, but Facilier appears to her and reminds us once again why this visual medium is so impressive. I mean, seriously, look at this. Using illusion magic, Facilier tries to convince Tiana to give him back the talisman by telling her he can give her the restaurant she wants. While looking at her father come home from his grueling shift at work, Tiana seems to give in for a moment, but then comes to her senses.
My daddy never did get what he wanted. But he had what he needed. He had love. He never lost sight of what was really important.
Easy with that. Careful.
And neither will I.
Now, this is either an example of the subtlety of this film working full swing, or a showcase of my inability to pick up on things. But I didn't realize that Tiana's mother says the same thing to her earlier in the film until the third time I watched it.
Tiana, your daddy may not have gotten the place he always wanted, but he had something better. He had love.
Facilier gets the talisman back, but Tiana manages to retrieve it with her frog tongue and smashes it. The Loa emerge, and since without the amulet, Facilier can no longer pay off his debt, they drag him into the spirit world in what is easily the best villain death of all time.
No! No! How am I ever going to pay back my debt?
There's something so unbelievably unnerving and spine-chilling about the fact that they repeat his own words to him in a mocking, impish way.
No! I'm not ready at all! Get back! I got lots more plans!
But the plot's not over yet. Tiana meets up with Naveen and Lottie kisses him, breaking the curse. Oh wait, that's not what happens. So Tiana and Naveen are forced to live out the rest of their lives cursed. They get married out in the swamps, and as they kiss, lo and behold, they turn human. Why is this? Well, it's relatively simple.
Once you became my wife, that made you
A princess. You just kissed yourself a princess.
Do you see why I love this movie so much? The film makes you think that this is the end, and I mean, it's literally the last few minutes. Right when it seems like they're doomed, in a sense, they get what they've wanted the whole film. Naveen makes good on his promise, I assume either with a loan from the LaBeoufs or his parents' money, and they manage to open the restaurant together. And the film has one last little smile-inducing nudge at the end, and that's the fact that Tiana renames the restaurant Tiana's Palace. Do you get it? Because she's a princess now? That's adorable. Oh yeah, and then for the very last shot, we get a glimpse of Evangeline and Ray together in the sky. That'll be important in a minute. Okay, so why is this film a masterpiece? Well, first of all, it is a perfect example of how subversion can be done with extreme tact and be made to fit so seamlessly into the story that you don't realize it's even happening. Well, what do I mean by this? Well, here's just a few examples. One, the story doesn't star the princess archetype. Lottie is for all intents and purposes a princess, like I said. She lives in a castle and is showered with wealth, and her father is a powerful, influential figure. I mean, she's even intended to marry a prince in case the point isn't clear enough. But no, the story isn't about her. It's about someone whom we would usually tend to overlook. A maid, a waitress, an impoverished woman who's downtrodden and in great turmoil. Secondly, the prince is not anything like the typical archetypal Disney prince we become accustomed to. He's rude, he's arrogant, he's downright mean sometimes. Plus, he's incompetent and has none of the wealth or power that a Disney prince usually would. In the same vein here, he doesn't marry the princess, so to speak, he marries the woman he loves. This works a lot better than some other examples we've had in the past, too, like, for example, Hercules. He does something similar, but he still gets to keep his godly powers and is venerated and worshipped by mortals, so I don't think he really made that much of a sacrifice. Naveen, on the other hand, makes the sacrifice of becoming an ordinary person forever so that he can be with the person he loves. I mean, the very core plot element of this film is something that is based around subversion. The original story ends with the princess kissing the frog and he becomes a prince, and that's the end. But the film totally subverts that expectation in such a brilliant way that you really have no idea what to expect next. Facilier follows Tiana's example in that, whereas we usually get viziers or dukes or kings or gods as villains, Facilier is also a commoner. He's poor and destitute, just like Tiana. And there's something very refreshing about that dynamic. There's another thing that makes this film incredibly special, and that's the metaphor that bleeds through the entire film and is yet something that I've personally not heard anybody really talk about. And that is, what does the evening star represent? Now, this is admittedly just my personal take here. The creators, to my knowledge, haven't confirmed this, and I don't believe I've heard anybody else make this particular assumption, but I still think it's worth bringing up. The way I see it, the evening star represents hope. Specifically, hope that seems pointless or even contrary to all reality. With this theme in mind, the story becomes a lot darker, and I think a lot of people don't give it credit for that upon an initial viewing. The theme of having hope even when it seems completely ridiculous is backed up by the following. Tiana's dream is to open a restaurant. Now that seems reasonably easy, right? Well, turn the clock back to the days when women had the right to vote for all of 6 years, set at 35 years before they could have a bank account, and, while you're at it, make them a person of color in the Deep South over 40 years before the end of segregation, and all of a sudden it starts to make sense. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, this is all before the plot even starts. The odds are already so cosmically stacked against Tiana in every sense that she has every reason to give up throughout the story. Her father dies right off the bat, and so she'll never be able to share her dream with him. She's stuck in a dead-end job where all accounts would lead one to believe she'll never be able to get enough money to purchase the land to build her restaurant. Even when a practical miracle happens and she gets enough money from Lottie to purchase the property, the racist owners refuse to sell it to her. Then, just as a second miracle comes down the pipeline in the form of a literal fairy tale prince promising to buy the land for her, her dreams are yet again crushed when she realizes he lied to her. She's cursed to live as a frog, and despite all the hardship of the film, including the death of her friend, she still fails even at the very last second despite all her effort to get what she wants. It's only when all hope seems to be gone for good that she finally gets what she fought so hard for. And, conspicuously, every single time that she struggles, the star is right above her, a symbol of her hope and a symbol of her unwillingness to give up on her dream no matter what. And this idea of not giving up no matter how impossible your dream seems is very well echoed with Ray. Ray is in love with a star, which is of course absurd. Throughout the entire film, it's constantly hinted that Ray is kind of insane and that his dream of being with Evangeline is impossible. And yet even at the very end, we see that it wasn't. That's the theme of the story as I see it. Never give up no matter how difficult or impossible your dream might seem. I think this is a wonderful message and puts a golden bow on this already masterful film. And it seems that we're going to get more of Tiana in her new show called Tiana that will premiere in 2023, proof that Disney will make anything in 2D except movies. I'm excited for the return to this world and these characters, but I wouldn't hold my breath for it being good, because the entirety of the entertainment industry has a pretty solid track record of not delivering on these types of projects. But now for the final question. Why doesn't Disney make 2D animated films anymore? Well, there are two culprits, and the motives really overlap. We'll start with the obvious one, Disney themselves. The obvious answer to this question of why doesn't Disney make 2D animated films anymore would seem to be, surely it's more expensive, right? I mean, if Disney can save a buck, that's the reason they're not going to make these anymore, right? Well, surprisingly no, actually. 3D animation is anywhere from 50 to 100% more expensive, and costs about $75 million more than 2D on average for a feature film. So then, why does Disney do this? Simple. It might not be cheaper, but it sure is quicker. 2D animation is extremely time-consuming and labor-intensive in a way that 3D simply isn't. For a single artist working on a 2D project, a single minute of animation can take anywhere from a month to 4 months, depending on the level of movement and how intricate the design work is. And so Disney has reasoned that even if it might be more expensive to make these films, they can make them more rapidly. See what sticks, one could say, especially in relation to the quality of these films in comparison to their earlier work. But this is not the only reason. If it was simply a case of not being able to make films as quickly, then Disney wouldn't have completely transitioned away from the medium. So remember how I mentioned a second culprit? Well, I'm sorry to say, but the real fault lies with me. And it lies with you.
Again, truth be told, if you're looking for the guilty, you need only look into a mirror.
That's right. We are the reason that Disney doesn't make 2D animated films anymore. How so? Well, in the same year that The Princess and the Frog came out, 3D films like Toy Story 3, Shrek Forever After, and Despicable Me made anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion. Meanwhile, The Princess and the Frog barely broke even at $270 million. The sad fact was that people simply were not showing up to 2D films anymore. It's the same exact story for claymation films as well, and if their success is anything to go on, Disney won't be following suit anytime soon. This is one instance where I can't blame Disney for the choice they made. I mean, think about it. You can either make films that take 3 times as long to produce and make virtually no money, or you can speed up production, make 12 times as much money, doing less work and quicker. The simple fact here is that Disney didn't make the decision, we did. We said we wanted 3D and they provided it. Boy, did they provide.
Oh, this beetle's got a booty.
Careful. It's a toot and boom.
Why is it called a...
And so there you have it. The good news is that Disney still makes some great content in 2D, primarily their TV shows. Amphibia, Owl House, and Gravity Falls are all great ways to appease your hunger for 2D. But if you're looking forward to another 2D film from Disney, don't hold your breath. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave me a like if you liked it, or dislike the video if you didn't like it. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below, subscribe for more, and I'll see you again soon. That's all for now.